You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanov, and let's take a look at the top headlines making news around the world. At least 270 people have died and over 1,500 are missing after a massive flash flood on the border between Nepal and Tibet. Tensions remain high over the Strait of Hormuz as the United States and its allies weigh diplomacy against further military action. And Syria reconnects with the global financial system as its leader pays with a Visa card at the Damascus restaurant. At least 270 people are reported dead and over 1,500 are missing after a massive flash flood along the border between Nepal and China. An international rescue operation has been launched with hundreds of foreign tourists unaccounted for.
The disaster hit Nepal's northern regions after severe flooding and landslides swept through villages, roads and trekking routes near the border with China. Rescue teams, supported by helicopters and drones, are searching for survivors as authorities continue to assess the scale of the destruction. The flooding has affected hundreds of foreign travelers in one of Nepal's most popular Himalayan tourism areas. The Nepal Tourism Board says 644 tourists are currently out of contact, including 517 foreign nationals from 19 countries. Those reported missing include travelers from India, the United States, Ukraine, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, South Korea, and Japan. Several European governments have issued safety warnings and emergency contacts for their citizens in Nepal. Among those missing are tourists and pilgrims traveling toward Mount Kailash and Lake Manasaravar in China. Australia said 34 citizens are unaccounted for, while authorities are working to confirm the status of affected travelers. Nepal has deployed more than 5,000 army and police personnel for search and rescue operations, evacuating residents and delivering emergency supplies to isolated areas. The disaster has triggered an international response. India has sent relief supplies, including shelters, medicines and hygiene kits. China, the European Union, the United States, South Korea, the World Health Organization and the Red Cross have also announced assistance. Authorities are urging travelers in affected areas to stay calm, follow official safety instructions and report their location to police, local authorities, travel agencies or tour operators. Early assessments suggest the flooding may have been linked to a glacier-related event that sent large amounts of water and debris into rivers, causing widespread destruction.
Extreme rainfall and flooding is also being felt across parts of Asia. Heavy rain has caused the Kao River in northern Vietnam to burst its banks. Meantime, rising water levels have submerged homes, roads and farmland, affecting communities along the river basin. Thousands have been evacuated to safety as water levels continue to rise. The United States says diplomacy remains the preferred option to resolve the dispute over Iran's nuclear program, but warns military action remains possible if talks fail. The comments come following a meeting between the U.S. Energy Secretary and the chief of the U.S. nuclear watchdog.
The United States says it remains committed to resolving the dispute over Iran's nuclear program through diplomacy. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said, Washington's preferred path is a negotiated agreement backed by international inspections. However, speaking alongside the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi, Wright warned that force could be used if necessary.
Our strong desire is to end the Iranian nuclear program through negotiations and through inspections administered by the International Atomic Energy Agency. If it needs to be done through military means to destroy their nuclear facilities and the industrial might of Iran, unfortunately, we will do that too.
Grossi warned that Iran still retains significant nuclear capabilities, including around 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%.
It is fair to say that we need to find an adequate solution and a long-standing and I would say predictable status quo when it comes to the nuclear issue in Iran.
Meanwhile, Tehran insists its nuclear program is aimed at civilian purposes. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization chief Mohammad Eslami said the country's scientific and technological achievements have helped reduce dependence on foreign support. He accused Iran's opponents of trying to undermine its progress through sanctions, pressure and sabotage, saying those efforts have failed. The dispute over uranium enrichment remains at the center of tensions between Washington and Tehran. The US demands limits on enrichment and expanded inspections, while Iran insists on its right to peaceful nuclear energy. Regional concerns have also grown over the security of the Strait of Hormuz. Reports say the waterway may still contain mines, despite US claims that the area has been cleared. Iran dismisses Washington's claims. Diplomatic efforts are continuing, with Qatar's Prime Minister set to visit Tehran in an effort to revive dialogue between Iran and the United States. China has criticized new US sanctions threats against Tehran. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf welcomed Beijing's position, saying the partnership between Iran and China is based on cooperation and does not require approval from other countries. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has commented on reports surrounding Iran's supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei's health. Trump said he does not believe Khamenei is dead, but suggested he may be seriously injured. As tensions remain high, Washington and Tehran continue to face pressure to find a diplomatic solution and avoid further escalation.
Israel's prime minister says efforts to resolve the confrontation with Iran remain uncertain. Benjamin Netanyahu claims he urged Donald Trump to consider a tighter siege on Iran at talks in Washington last month, before the latest sanctions were announced. He insists Israel will continue to act to defend itself.
Iran attack us, and if they attack us, they will suffer a blow they never dreamed of, much stronger than what they have suffered until now.
Iranian businesses say the impact of economic sanctions is starting to bite, along with the ongoing costs arising from the conflict in the Gulf.
U.S. sanctions are adding to the economic hardship in Iran, with shopkeepers saying the measures are making business and everyday life even harder amid the war. In Bandar Abbas, businesses say the impact is being felt through a weaker currency, higher prices, and greater pressure on livelihoods.
Under any circumstances, sanctions do inflict blows. The rise in the exchange rate affects life and livelihood, but ultimately we are Iranians, and Iranians know how to bypass sanctions well.
The latest restrictions, announced on Monday, could see countries trading with Iran cut off from the dollar-based financial system. The new measures come as Iran faces wider economic disruption linked to the conflict with the U.S. and Israel, which has also severely affected shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial route for around a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments.
In the way that we are under pressure, we are 100% distressed. The youth have many grievances against the officials who, really, in my opinion, they are traitors. Why? Because they truly do not attend to the people's suffering.
General inflation stands at around 69%, according to reports, with price tags on some imported foods seeing triple-digit annual cost spikes. The Iranian rial has also plummeted to an all-time low. Decades of international trade restrictions, combined with domestic economic mismanagement and now fresh sanctions, are adding to the strain on businesses and households already struggling.
Meanwhile, talks aimed at shaping Gaza's post-war future are continuing at the United Nations, with members discussing security, governance and reconstruction plans. It comes as disagreements remain over the disarmament of Hamas, Israeli withdrawal from the Strip, and the role of international forces in the territory.
I hear a lot of critics, as the High Representative said, hand-wringing and criticizing, but I don't hear a lot of alternative, credible plans. Now, for the first time, troops and personnel from partner nations are scheduled to arrive to keep the peace. Tactical vehicles are already at the ISF logistics base. Countries as far as Uganda, Morocco, Kazakhstan have offered thousands of troops to this effort. No, they are not moving as quickly as we would like, but they are moving. And yes, the disarmament of Hamas must and will be closely scrutinized. It must be verified by objective parties.
Syria is moving toward reconnecting with the global financial system. It comes after Washington officially removed the country from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. In a show of support for the country's financial future, its president was seen making an electronic payment at a Damascus restaurant on Wednesday.
Ahmad al-Shara was using a Visa card seen at the Damascus cafe in the presence of Syrian Central Bank Governor Safwat Raslan. After the removal of the country from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism, efforts are underway to restore access to international financial services across the country. The ending of sanctions that have lasted more than 4 decades has opened the door for foreign investment and reconstruction efforts in Syria. Al-Shara called the decision a turning point, saying his country is entering a new phase of rebuilding and development. Washington said the move reflects steps by Syria's new government to distance itself from terrorism after months of negotiations. The decision has received regional support, with Turkey welcoming it as a step towards Syria's recovery. Companies such as Bank of America and MasterCard are also exploring ways to reconnect Syria with global financial networks. The return of international card payments could make trade easier, provide safer transactions, improve access to digital services, and help attract investment.
Turkey's trade minister has been in Damascus for talks on reconstruction and investment. Turkey and Syria are looking to deepen commercial and economic ties, with the two neighbors aiming for $10 billion in annual bilateral trade by the start of the next decade. Adam Moro reports from Istanbul.
Turkish Trade Minister Ömer Bolat held a series of meetings in Damascus on Wednesday as Ankara looks to expand its economic role in Syria's recovery and reconstruction. Bolat visited the Syrian capital with a high-level Turkish business delegation for the 63rd Damascus International Fair. Bolat and his accompanying delegation met Syrian Economy and Industry Minister Nidal El-Shar, with whom they discussed means of increasing bilateral trade to $10 billion a year. The two sides also discussed ways to ease the movement of goods by improving cross-border transport and customs procedures. They also reviewed opportunities for Turkish companies to participate in Syria's post-conflict reconstruction. Turkish business representatives who accompanied the minister also outlined longer-term investment plans aimed at expanding production and creating jobs. Economic ties between Turkey and Syria have accelerated since the fall of President Bashar al-Assad's government in late 2024. Turkey has since emerged as a key regional supporter of Syria's post-Assad leadership after years of backing the country's armed opposition during Syria's lengthy internal conflict. Ankara is now seeking a major role in Syria's reconstruction, especially in terms of infrastructure, energy, transport, and manufacturing. For Turkey, expanding trade and investment in Syria could help stabilize its southern neighbor while also rebuilding economic links disrupted by more than a decade of war. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now we have a short break. Right after the break, we'll have more global news. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Authorities in Ukraine say Russia launched missiles and drones overnight on Thursday, targeting the capital Kiev and other areas. In the surrounding region, 2 people were injured as Russian missile and drone attacks caused a fire in warehouse premises and damaged other warehouses, as well as private houses, the regional governor said. Ukraine's Air Force said the barrage included 2 Onyx anti-ship cruise missiles, 258 drones and an unspecified number of ballistic missiles. The Air Force said that nearly 90% of the drones were down, as well as 1 Onyx and 7 ballistic missiles. Meanwhile, there's been a sharp rise in demand for rentals from Russians in Georgia's and Armenia's capital cities. That's according to data from the investigative news outlet Vazhnya Istorie. It says the increase is driven by anxiety over a possible new draft tied to Russia's State Duma elections. It comes as Russia's own customs service confirms record numbers of its citizens crossing into Georgia through the Larsi checkpoint. Our Nini Nikolashvili explains the story from Tbilisi.
Thousands of Russians are searching for apartments in Georgia and Armenia right now, according to reports. It seems not because of a war order that's been signed, but because of one they are afraid is coming. No mobilization decree exists yet, but across Russia, chatter about a new draft tied to the State Duma elections is enough to send people looking for an exit, and Tbilisi is one of their top destinations. According to independent news agency Vazhneye Story, demand for long-term rentals from Russian citizens in the Georgian capital jumped 20 to 30% compared to last year, pushing average rents about $12.3 per square meter, more than $2 higher than the year before. In Yerevan, demand climbed even faster, up to 35%, with real estate agencies fielding several new inquiries a day, according to the report. Housing administrators describe a split reaction among Russians, saying some are locking in long-term leases to avoid future price spikes if mobilization hits, while others are booking short stays, betting the collapse won't come until after the Duma vote. This is not an isolated trend. It follows Russia's own customs data, which shows up to 20,000 of its citizens are crossing every day at the Larsi border into Georgia. Georgia's parliamentary committee chairman, Levan Mahashvili, dismissed the concern outright, calling it a storm in a teacup stirred up by politicians, and insists the border traffic reflects nothing more than an ordinary tourist season. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Russian forces are increasing pressure on key Ukrainian strongholds in the Donetsk region, while Ukraine is expanding its long-range strikes against the Russian military and energy targets. In another development, CIA Director John Ratcliffe has held talks with Russian intelligence officials in Moscow. To discuss the latest on the situation on the ground and what may come next, we're joined from Kiev by Yulia O'Connell, member of Dignitas. Yulia, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having me.
So, Ms. O'Connell, let me first start with the battlefield. Russian forces are putting increasing pressure on Kostiantynivka and Kramatorsk and also Slovyansk. How serious is the situation around these three cities, and what would their loss mean for Ukraine's broader defense of Donetsk?
Well, Slavyansk, yes, it's really a city right now that's, just about to be occupied, and that has been confirmed even by our Dignitas founder, who traveled recently to the east and in Slavyansk, and it looks like that city would be eventually occupied. Kramatorsk is much bigger industrial city, so it's much harder to really for the Russians to move into that. It's not fields. It's not the small kind of town. It's pretty big. So, but overall, in general, strategically, it's not good for Ukraine. Any line that is being moved, or any architecture of the defense line that has to move, it's never good for Ukraine. That being said, Russians do it with a huge human cost, and that's why you probably see right now the people live in Russia fearing of the draft. The way Russians move is they send up to 80 and 90 people, and we talked to the commanders at the battlefield who sees this kind of infiltration. They send them up until one person after 80 dead or 90 dead will get that position on the ground, and that's how they kind of infiltrate. So it looks like they're occupying. It's also very kind of, the picture is very different from the from the where you have trench and there is a battlefield in between. They do kind of get through, infiltrate, but it doesn't mean that they fully occupy. But that being said, Slavyansk is not seeing a good days right now, that's for sure.
Ms. O'Connell, open source assessments suggest Russian troops have been infiltrating deeper into Kostiantynivka, including through houses, basements and ruins. How significant is this kind of urban infiltration, and can Ukrainian forces realistically prevent Russia from establishing a foothold inside the city?
That's a very interesting conversation for the modern warfare. Again, because they do infiltrate, but they infiltrate in a huge, humongous human cost. Then they get to that position, they sit in the hole, they, what we say by the word, the soldier who holds the ground holds the land. So in that regard, it looks like they are holding the ground, but at the same time, they can't really do much out of that hole, and they can be, at some point, Ukrainian forces get them out. So this is, and sometimes Ukrainian forces also get, they do same kind of tactics and strategy that get infiltrated, hold that position. And it becomes, the front line is not very straight. It's kind of dispersed, if you will. And the drones, that what right now makes the difference. So if Ukraine is able, and shows that is able to build not only a great defense with help of drones, but also send the drones, ground drones, into the positions where Ukrainians don't have to send soldiers, that becomes very difficult for Russians to move out of those holes. So it's very different type of war right now that we are seeing that, have been so far for centuries.
Ms. O'Connell, Ukraine is increasingly striking targets deep inside Russia, including oil refineries, logistics facilities and military infrastructure. Is Kiev's strategy shifting towards systematically degrading Russia's ability to sustain the war? And how effective could this campaign ultimately be?
Well, the best word you just use is systematic. So Ukraine does deep strikes systematically, and it's up to 1,000, up to 2,000 kilometers deep into the Russian territory.
Yes.
It does hit many oil refineries, production facilities, storage facilities, wild berries. That's all kind of pressure that Ukraine puts on Russia. When we talk to commanders, it's not fully 100% clear how much longer Russia would be able to sustain. So from one side, it's definitely painful. They definitely see the gas shortage. They definitely have the problems with logistics. We do have in Ukraine quiet days simply because Russians were not able to accumulate enough Shahed drones or rockets to hit Ukraine. So that's happening, but how long, how much longer this kind of situation would be, some people say it could be for years. It could not, it could be definitely not, definitely doesn't finish this year or next year. Russia would be doing the same. They can't really move the front line, so they're trying to be as painful as possible to Ukrainian electricity grid, Ukrainian critical infrastructure. The Ukrainians are doing the same, but this is a war of attrition. It's very hard to understand where the end of it.
So there have been reports that Moscow is considering intensified ballistic missile attacks on Kiev and other critical infrastructure because peace efforts have stalled. How credible is this threat, and what could Russia hope to achieve through another escalation of missile strikes?
Well, their advantage right now is that they do have ballistic missiles, and Ukraine does not have enough Patriot interception missiles or other type of interception. So they do have advantage when they send. They have up to 120 ballistic missiles a month they can use on Ukraine. Again, they're trying to put pressure on civilians. They're trying to put pressure on people in Ukraine to push them, kind of get into surrender. mindset. It's not happening. I have not seen it happening. I spoke to many people. Just they keep living their life, being very resilient. But that's Russia sees at their advantage right now. They're going to do it more. The only thing that Ukraine can do is to build drones. To build interception rockets and to get the support from the West.
Ms. O'Connell, CIA Director John Ratcliffe made a highly unusual and secretive visit to Moscow and met with Russian intelligence officials. What do you think was the most likely purpose of these talks, and why would Washington choose an intelligence channel rather than a more traditional diplomatic one?
As far as the news says, that what I learned, it was the first visit since last visit was in 1922. So it's kind of seems very, very significant. I think that President Trump, with his pursuit to end the war, trying to find, or use all kind of diplomatic or resources, and maybe that was a warning to Russia that continuing the war would not make much sense. In United States, after the death of the Senator Lindsey Graham, it was a bill that Senate passed and the Congress is ready to pass that puts tremendous sanctions on Russia. And that could be kind of the last warning that if Putin would not stop the war, they would impose those sanctions that, Russia have not seen yet. So that could be my take on it.
Yulia O'Connell, member of Dignitas, thank you very much for joining us on A News and for sharing your analysis with us. We greatly appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. More of the top global news stories now, and chipmaker Nvidia is forecasting a sharp rise in sales in the coming years, signaling that the boom in spending on artificial intelligence is still growing. Nvidia says it expects revenue in 2028 to grow by around 70%, while forecasting third quarter revenue of $108 billion, slightly above analysts' expectations. They added that demand for AI computing remains strong, although shortages of memory components could limit the industry's expansion. The company also plans, along with Amazon Web Services, to deploy 2 million additional graphics processing units next year and in 2028. The so-called GPUs are needed for the new generation of AI technology. The growing trade rift between the United States and Canada is now hitting one of North America's biggest industries. Automakers are facing rising costs as the two neighbors remain at odds over tariffs.
Canadian automakers are facing higher costs after talks between the two countries broke down and Washington moved to double tariffs on Canadian vehicles and parts.
Good conversation with the Prime Minister last night.
US President Donald Trump announced on Monday that a 50% tariff on Canadian cars, trucks and auto parts will take effect on the 1st of January. That is up from the current 25%. The move came just days after manufacturers had hoped the two countries would reach a deal to reduce tariffs to 15% on Canadian cars and light-duty trucks. Canadian-built vehicles accounted for about 6% of American vehicle sales last year, but the impact could still be significant for companies including Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, Toyota and Honda. Toyota and Honda together produced more than 75% of Canada's 1.2 million vehicles in 2025. Higher duties on parts could also raise costs throughout the North American supply chain, as components regularly cross the US-Canada border during production. Meanwhile, US Trade Representative Jameson Greer said there are currently no further talks between Washington and Ottawa. On Wednesday, Trump stepped up his rhetoric, saying it was time to teach Canada after the talks collapsed. Canada has already retaliated, imposing duties on around $20 billion worth of American imports, due to take effect on the 8th of September, alongside support for affected businesses and workers. White House advisor Peter Navarro warned that any future deal would be worse for Canada than the offer it rejected last week. However, industry sources remain hopeful that the January deadline leaves enough time for the two sides to reach an agreement and prevent the higher auto tariffs from taking effect.
Major changes to how teenagers use Facebook and Instagram. It ends a high-profile U.S. legal battle over claims that Meta designed addictive products that hooked young people and misled the public about the safety of its platforms.
Meta has agreed to pay up to $17 billion and introduce new safety measures for teenagers, settling claims that Facebook and Instagram were designed to encourage excessive use among young users. The agreement brings an early end to a high-profile federal trial in which 29 US states accused the company of misleading the public about risks linked to its platforms. California Attorney Channel said the settlement would require major changes to better protect children online.
We sued Meta over claims that it designed and deployed harmful features on Instagram and Facebook that drive compulsive use and harm young users' mental health, and that the company knew about these dangers and lied to teens, to parents, and to the public about them. We believe the proposed settlement filed today addresses some of the concerns at the core of our lawsuit, and that it will force transformative changes necessary to protect our children. And importantly, these changes will be made within months. No more waiting.
Under the agreement, Meta will provide up to $17 billion to participating states over 10 years. California could receive between $1.5 and $2.1 billion if the settlement is approved. The company will also introduce new restrictions for teenage users, including a 2-hour daily limit and overnight access blocks between midnight and 6 a.m., unless parents allow otherwise. The settlement also includes stronger parental controls and additional measures to prevent children from accessing harmful content.
The dispute between European football officials UEFA and the game's global governing body FIFA appears to be easing. UEFA is expected to drop its threat to boycott FIFA competitions. It follows assurances that controversial plans to sell stakes in major tournaments have been abandoned.
The Union of European Football Associations is expected to end its threat to boycott FIFA tournaments after receiving assurances that plans to sell stakes in the World Cup and other major competitions will not be revived. The dispute began after FIFA proposed the idea, prompting UEFA's 55 member associations to agree on a potential boycott of FIFA events. FIFA later withdrew the proposal in July, and UEFA officials are expected to confirm the end of the boycott threat at a meeting in Monaco. A UEFA source said the decision was not a defeat, but aimed at protecting players' opportunities, while the push for changes within FIFA would continue. Despite easing tensions, UEFA is expected to maintain pressure on FIFA President Gianni Infantino over the issue. European League's president Claudius Schäfer has also called for reforms at FIFA, saying Infantino should not continue in the role. Infantino, who is seeking a 4th term next year, faces opposition from several football confederations, including UEFA, the Asian Football Confederation, and CONCACAF.
Icelanders will decide this weekend whether to reopen negotiations on membership of the European Union. A new poll puts support for joining the bloc narrowly ahead in the polls. But the debate goes far beyond Europe, with fishing rights, national independence and security all playing a role.
Support for restarting Iceland's EU membership negotiations has slipped further, with a new poll putting the two sides just 2.6 percentage points apart. The Mosquina survey of 1,019 people found 51.3% support restarting talks with Brussels, while 48.7% are opposed. That's down from a poll on 13th August when support stood at 52.2%. Iceland will vote on the issue on Saturday, 29th August. But this isn't a vote on EU membership itself. A yes vote would allow negotiations to restart, and any eventual deal would then have to be put to voters in a second referendum. Fishing remains at the heart of the debate. Iceland's fishing industry is central to both its economy and national identity, and opponents fear EU membership could mean losing control over the country's fishing grounds.
We have 100% of the profit in Iceland, and we want to keep it that way. So that is our worries if we join the common fisheries policy, is that this value chain that has generated all this profit for the Icelandic population, that will be torn apart.
For others, it's a broader question of keeping control over the country's own affairs. The debate has also been shaped by the cost of living, the war in Ukraine, and repeated threats by US President Donald Trump to annex Greenland. Iceland is already part of the European single market and the Schengen area. It's also a member of the European Free Trade Association. But it has no formal influence over EU decision-making. A Foreign Ministry memo estimates that, if Saturday's vote is in favour, accession talks could begin by the end of 2026 and take between 18 and 24 months to conclude.
France's growing debt burden is becoming a key issue in campaigning ahead of the next year's presidential election. A controversial proposal to cancel part of the country's debt has intensified the debate over whether voters should back higher taxes or deeper spending cuts. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a radical proposal to wipe out part of France's public debt collides with a presidential race already being reshaped by economic anxiety. Far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon wants the Bank of France to cancel the government bonds it holds. He says the bank could simply take the 18% of French public debt and, quote, just chuck it in the fire, reducing the debt burden and freeing up money for public spending. Former IMF chief economist Olivier Blanchard has called the debate over the proposal idiotic. In an exchange on X, he argued cancellation would largely amount to an accounting exercise because the Bank of France would lose interest in profits it would otherwise return to the French government, while potentially undermining investor confidence. And that matters with French debt already above 116% of GDP. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu issued an even starker warning on X. France needs to raise a record 310 billion euros this year, and he questioned who would keep lending if the country reneged on its commitments, warning investors could demand exorbitant interest rates. Later today, the argument moves onto the campaign stage. Mélenchon joins Marine Le Pen, Gabriel Attal, Edouard Philippe, Bruno Retailleau, Raphael Glucksmann, and Marine Tondelier for the first televised debate of the 2027 presidential campaign. Candidates will face questions from business leaders and respond to a consultation involving nearly 66,000 company executives. Expect debt, taxes, investment, and competitiveness to dominate, with Mélenchon under pressure to show his economic agenda can withstand scrutiny from businesses, investors, and political rivals. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
And after the break, we'll take a look at the stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back, and you're watching A News. Armenia's former president Robert Kocharyan has been remanded in custody for 2 months following a ruling by the country's top anti-corruption court. Kocharyan remains in hospital after his health worsened following recent heart surgery. He's accused, along with others, of using his position to acquire public property at below market value prices during his 10 years in office until 2008. He was detained alongside his son and 4 others in raids on family businesses on Tuesday. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also addressed Robert Kocharyan's detention at a press briefing on Thursday. He has said that former presidents Robert Kocharyan, Tsukyan and Sarah Sarkisyan should live on their pensions and legal income, and warned any assets acquired illegally must be returned to the Armenian state and its people.
If this is a question of giving instructions, I am not instructing the judicial system. I am demanding from it, especially since that judge has already retired. Go and look into his and his family's entire assets, both in Armenia and abroad. We are now cooperating with international anti-corruption networks, and Armenia's law enforcement system is cooperating with them. Go and see what his relatives are involved in. Could it turn out that they are, once again, talented business people, each a millionaire or even a billionaire? We have to go after everyone. Them, their mothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law, everyone. They must explain why criminals like Serge Sargsyan and Robert Kocharian are still free.
Kazakhstan is looking to strengthen international support for a major green energy project linking Central Asia and the South Caucasus. Together with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, it's developing a Trans-Caspian energy corridor that could eventually open a new route for green electricity exports. Our correspondent Fariza Kilimurzina has more.
Kazakhstan is working with the European Commission on a project to transmit green electricity across the Caspian Sea. The country's energy ministry says the initiative is being developed together with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan. Astana is seeking the Commission's institutional support, as the corridor could eventually provide a new route for green electricity exports to European markets. The idea is to create an energy corridor that would carry electricity from Central Asia across the Caspian to Azerbaijan. In the longer term, it could connect the energy systems of Central Asia and the South Caucasus, opening opportunities to export green electricity to Europe and other markets. And this could be a major venture. According to the project's consultant, it could integrate up to 5 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. At this stage, it's still in the planning phase. A feasibility study is underway to determine how the corridor would work, its main technical details and its financial model. That study is expected to be completed in January 2027. Around 1 million euros has been allocated for the work, funded by the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The three countries have already taken steps towards implementation. In June last year, Kazakhstan's Kigok, Azerbaijan's Azer Energy and the National Electric Grid of Uzbekistan signed an agreement to set up a joint company to move the project forward. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
The Middle Corridor is also at the center of growing transport and trade ties between Kazakhstan and Singapore. A new memorandum of understanding has been signed between the two countries to modernize logistics, digitize transport and support trade along the corridor, which links China and Central Asia with Europe through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan and Turkey. Trade between Kazakhstan and Singapore reached $777 million in the first half of the year, more than doubling on a year-by-year basis. Earlier we spoke with Gaiser Nawab, chairman of the Belt and Road Initiative for Sustainable Development based in Islamabad, Pakistan, about Kazakhstan and Singapore's efforts to expand transport and trade cooperation, with a particular focus on the Middle Corridor. Let's take a look.
So this is an important question when we see the regional issues and when we see especially the wars in the region as well. And the international multinational companies, they of course are looking for something stable and for something peaceful, particularly when it's come to transportation. And I think one on another side, we see that it involves a greater economy as well, like there's a greater involvement of businesses, import, export as well. And I think a lot of charges and the fees through this transportation, the countries can charge and can also develop their nation through these routes. Like the routes itself is not only a transportation, but it's the transportation of culture, it's the transportation of civilization, it's transportation of digitalization, the science and technology, the education. Before in the past, in the history, we have seen a very good example of the Silk Route, and I mean this route was not just only the routes for the camels or for the transportation, but this was the routes for the the knowledge, the exchange, the harmony, the peace. And I think the Russian and the other Central Asian countries, the all major stakeholders, they understand actually the importance of the route, and they understand the importance of the corridor as well, and it's the benefit for everyone. It's not benefiting a single nation or a single company or a single stakeholder. I believe that this is somehow a very, very developmental step towards the nation's development, the country's development, and the regional development itself as well. So we believe that personally, that I think this can somehow having the interest of all the stakeholder, and that will probably be a stable one, and the international companies and the multinational businesses will take much benefit of that of that middle corridor. And almost all the nations across the middle corridors are very much stable in a way, and their leaderships are very much committed to making it happen in a practical way, and they are very much sincere to their own people as well.
Closer economic and strategic ties between China and Uzbekistan were the focus of high-level talks in Beijing. China's top legislator Zhao Leji met with the head of Uzbekistan's presidential administration to discuss bilateral ties and future cooperation. Zhao said relations have reached an all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership. The two sides highlighted cooperation in the economy, transport and education, while Uzbekistan backed closer exchanges and wider cooperation with China. Tashkent is preparing for a major expansion of its logistics infrastructure with a new terminal planned in partnership with international logistics company DP World. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
United Arab Emirates-based logistics company DP World is set to begin construction of a $288 million logistics terminal in Tashkent. The facility is expected to handle up to 150,000 containers and 120 million tons of cargo, providing additional capacity for the movement and processing of goods. The first ton for the project is expected to be late in October. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev welcomed the plans, saying, "We have been preparing for this for a long time. This project is very important for us. It is necessary." The terminal is being developed as Tashkent expands its logistics and industrial infrastructure. The area around the existing industrial zone already has a project portfolio worth $1.2 billion, with 10 projects planned to launch this year. The project comes as the capital sees strong growth in investment and trade. Tashkent attracted $5.6 billion in investment in the first 8 months of 2026. While the city is targeting $9 billion by the end of this year and exports of $4 billion. Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to A News for more.